Hi everybody, it's Courtney with Honeybee Stamps, and today I am going to be creating a pretty simple card using the Build-A-Bot stamp set along with its coordinating dies. I'm also going to be using the Gear Up Sentiment stamp set and the In Gear stencil, which is a two parts. It's a layering stencil set. So I'm going to start off with my background here, and I have a piece of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock. You can see that I just used a piece of Post-it note tape to kind of mask off anywhere I want. You can kind of put this wherever you want it to be. And I'm going to start with the first layer of my stencil here. And I'm using Weathered Wood Distress Oxide, and you know, I usually tape down my stencil or use the Pixie spray, but in this case, I figured there was enough room where I wasn't adding the ink where I could hold it down. I struggled a little. Tape it down or use Pixie spray. Don't do what I did. Luckily, it's a very easy stencil to line back up. When it did shift around a little bit, it was quite easy to line back up. So I'm just going to go in with this one color here for the weathered wood, and I'm just putting an even layer down. I'm not pressing too hard with my blending brush. I just want a nice even layer and not necessarily a very dark one. Once that's done, I am going to take the next layer, which are these little dots that go right in the center of these gears. This time I learned my lesson, and I am using some Post-it note tape just to kind of hold this down a little bit while I continue on with my ink blending. So I'm going to bring out the Pumice Stone Distress Oxide, and these colors are not too far off. I would say one is a little bit more warmer than the other, but because the Distress Oxides are more opaque than a regular dye ink would be, it's going to kind of sit on top of the previous layer. So you'll be able to see the difference, where if you were to use a dye ink and they were this similar, you may not get the same results. It's a little hard to see on camera, but you can see in the final photos. So once my ink blending was done, I can go ahead and remove my stencil and remove that Post-it note tape mask. And I went ahead and put this aside. Next, we're going to work on our little robot. And this stamp set has so many different options. And I kind of played around to see how I wanted to build my bot. There is different faces, there's different little bodies and legs and arms, and you can kind of mix and match any way you want, and there's so many different robots that you can create. Now, once I was able to figure out which ones I actually wanted to use for my card, I went ahead, I'm using my Mini Misty here just because I don't want to have to use an acrylic block to stamp out all these images. But when you do stamp these out, especially if you plan on using the coordinating dies, you want to make sure that you're leaving enough space in between each one of the images so that you have room to line up those dies, which isn't a big deal if you do more than one pass through your die cutting machine. But again, I'm pretty lazy when it comes to that kind of stuff, so one pass is all I want to make. So next I went ahead and stamped these out with Blackout ink by Ink on 3 because it is a Copic safe ink. I did stamp these twice. This is the first time I'm using this stamp set, so I wanted to make sure that I got a nice bold black outline for all of my images. And you can see that I also stamped out that little gear balloon and the balloon string as well. So next, moving on to the coloring here, I kept it very, very simple. I'm keeping all grays throughout this entire card. So I am going to start off with my cool grays here. And typically when I do my Copic coloring, if you guys have ever watched my channel before, you will know that I typically start out with my lightest color, not only to map out my darkest areas first, but also to get the paper a little saturated. Usually if you saturate the paper just a little bit before you do your blending, you'll have better luck blending. The blending will be a little bit more seamless. I don't find that that's necessarily the case with grays. For some reason, the grays blend really well together. So I'm able to go right in with my darkest color first, which is the C7. And I'm using it pretty sparingly. I'm actually leaving a huge highlight area for all of these little individual images for the C1. So next I'm going to bring in the C5, and I am just going to extend that C7 out just a little bit more. Again, I'm leaving a huge highlight area. You can see that I am leaving some areas of the robot white for now, and those areas, excuse me, are going to be for my warm grays, just to kind of mix it up and to match my background. Next is the C3, and again, doing the same thing, just extending that out a little bit. Now I am going around his eyes. You don't have to. You can color right over the eyes and just go in with a white gel pen later to kind of bring those whites in his eyes back, but it was pretty easy to go around. So finally, once that C3 was down, I'm going to bring in the C1, and this is going to be a majority of each one of these images. Like I said, I left a really, really large highlight, and you'll see that I start blending these out where I left off with the C3. I'm not going over the entire image with the C1 to get these to blend, because you're just going to end up moving that color around. It's a pretty light color, and it's going to act very similar as a colorless blender. So just be sure not to go over your darkest area with your lightest color. So once the cool grays were done, I'm going to bring out some warm grays. And there's very few areas I need to fill in with the warm grays. My warm grays, especially my W5, is getting pretty dry. And for those of you who have Copics, you know that the refills are kind of changing over. They're no longer going to do the various inks. They're changing over. And as far as I know, they're not available yet. So they're hard to come by. So I'm not able to get a refill. A lot of my markers are drying up, so I'm kind of limited as far as what colors to use. But I pretty much did the same thing. I'm just using 3 colors here because, again, my markers are dry. But I added my shading in the same areas as I added the shading for the cool grays as well. Now for the little gear balloon here, I don't have any other grays. I have the warm grays and the cool grays. I don't have the toners or the neutral grays. So I wanted to kind of mix this up a little bit. And if you saw my previous video where I shaded with grays and then went over with another color, I'm going to pretty much do the same thing this time. However, I'm going to do my shading with a color and then go over it with the grays. So I'm going to bring in some B90 markers. And I'm just going to add a little bit of shading to the base part of this balloon. And I did start off with the B95 and then went to the B93 and B91 and realized there was just not enough contrast for me. So I ended up bringing in the B97 and just added a little bit of that to the bottom and quickly, very, very quickly blended that out with the B95 just so that I didn't overblend and lose that contrast. So this is naturally blue. I don't want it to be blue. So I'm going to go over the entire thing with the C3. And this is going to tone down that blue and make it more of a grayish blue color to match the rest of the card. So now that my coloring is all done, I have all of the coordinating dies already ready to go. And I just line these up and hold these down with some Post-it note tape. You can use washi tape or whatever else you have in your stash, just so that they don't shift around when they go through my Gemini. Now, I forgot to zoom back out after I did my coloring, and I've been doing that a lot lately, and I'm not sure why. I switched over from my camera to my phone lately, and temporarily anyway, and I keep forgetting to zoom back out. So I do apologize. We're going to be super close for the rest of this card. So ran that through my Gemini, and I have all of my different little pieces of my robot now. So I brought back out my card panel, and I kind of just laid these out the way I wanted them before making these permanent. Because we have a little white outline around each one of these images, I want to kind of make sure that I tuck them underneath the previous one, just so that I don't see that white outline on the bottom or the top, wherever the two pieces meet, if that makes any sense. And you don't have to do this. You can even separate these a little bit and really make it look kind of wonky, but I decided to kind of tuck everything together. I am going to pop each one of these pieces up with some foam tape. You can certainly lay them down flat or maybe even lay some pieces down flat, but I decided to use some foam tape to add a little bit of dimension. I started out with the body because I figured that would be the easiest, and then I can kind of build up around that. So when I added his little face there, I kind of tucked his little neck underneath So when I added the foam tape to the back of each one of these images, I made sure that I left just a tiny bit of space on all 4 sides. That way I could tuck each one of the images that need to be connected to it underneath it. And that foam tape didn't get in my way. So once I had everything put together for my robot, I wanted to make it look as if he is holding this gear balloon. This is naturally going to be a birthday card, hence the balloon. And I wanted the balloon to be popped up, but the string is just easier to tuck behind. Well, first of all, I didn't want to put foam tape on that skinny little balloon string. So I did end up gluing that part down flat with some Tombow Mono multi glue, and then use some foam tape to pop up the actual balloon right on top of that. So now that my little robot is all together, I'm going to go ahead and add my sentiment from the Gear Up stamp set. It's a sentiment stamp set. I'm going to use a couple different sentiments from this set. Now, I wanted to have the happy birthday, but I wanted this beep boop, I think it says. And I wanted it to kind of be at an angle above it. I was going to stamp it all at once, but I was too afraid that little balloon that's popped up is going to get in my way. So I ended up stamping these separately. I'm going to go ahead and stamp out the happy birthday. And again, I'm sorry that it's so zoomed in, but I am going to be using some VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I've had this ink pad for years. It's never been re-inked. I don't even know if they have re-inkers for it, but this ink lasts forever, and it's definitely my favorite for sentiments. It is a fast drying pigment ink. Just keep in mind that it's not immediately drying, so it's not going to dry as fast as a dye ink, but it is going to dry a little bit faster than most pigment inks. So you just want to make sure that you don't smear it. You give it a minute or so to dry. Now I have my card base here, and I am going to stamp the inside of my card base as well with another one of the sentiments from that stamp set. And from the Build-A-Bot stamp set, I am going to take these little tiny gears and kind of just stamp these around this sentiment. I have been trying to decorate, not really decorate, but finish the inside of my cards. That way when I go to send them out, I don't have to kind of be scrambling to find the right sentiment to put inside. It is already ready to go. So I went ahead and adhered my card panel down to my white A2 size card base here, and I am going to finish off with a few details with a white gel pen. Well, first I had a little smudge. My fingers were a little inky. I'm just using a sand eraser. When you use a sand eraser, you just want to go with a very light hand. You probably have to do it a couple of times, but just don't go in with too much pressure, else you're just going to rip your paper. So I added a few highlights with a white gel pen to kind of make him look a little bit more shiny. I'm going to add some crystal glaze, which is very similar to glossy accents. It's just a little bit thinner, but I'm out of glossy accents, so this was the next best thing. Went over the balloon with that, and then added just a little bit of sparkle to some of the areas, mainly the warm gray areas of this little robot. But that is it. That is the card for today, guys. As always, I will leave the information about the supplies I used in the description box below. Thanks so much for stopping by today, and have a great day. Bye.